After the Second World War, the world, and the United States in particular, had an obsession with space. Space was the final frontier. After the evil empires of Hitler's Third Reich and Japan were defeated, it seemed like the sky was the only fence facing humanity in its progress and destiny. This time of unlimited dreaming of space was epitomized by things like the Jetsons. We were going to have hamburger bars in space. We were going to be flying off to all parts of the solar system. There were going to be hotels in space. We were going to have holidays on the moon and moonbake. German physicist Werner von Braun promised that we would have orbiting space stations. And this seemed to all be coming together during the Apollo moon landings between 1969 and 1972. The potential for space exploration seemed unlimited. It also brought great peril, with the Soviet satellite Sputnik being launched in 1957. Americans feared that the Soviets could launch nuclear weapons into their homeland. President Eisenhower was fully aware of the US Army's experiments on rockets that went into high altitude and into orbit, and that they were completely unsuccessful and came back a charred mess. But to the public, Sputnik seemed like a real threat. Eisenhower correctly assessed it as just being a tin can with a radio transmitter, but the US public saw this as the dawning of a new and frightening space age, where the Soviets could easily launch their deadly nuclear weapons from the center of Russia to the center of America. This documentary tries to show that Eisenhower was correct in his assessment. Sputnik was no trouble at all, and intercontinental ballistic missiles never came to be due to unsolved problems of re-entry. A senator from Massachusetts, John Kennedy, portrayed Eisenhower as being an old fuddy-duddy who was behind the times and asleep at the wheel, even though this was a completely unfair assessment. The only missile gap was in the minds of the American public with respect to what ICBM technology could really achieve. Supposedly, the Soviets had working intercontinental ballistic missiles with atomic warheads by the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Well, then why did that crisis happen at all? Why should President Kennedy care where Khrushchev deployed his nuclear missiles, whether it was just off the coast in Cuba or launched by supposed space-going intercontinental ballistic missiles from the center of the Soviet Union? It's because true space-going ICBMs aren't possible, and this documentary explains why, and why the Cuban Missile Crisis was a threat. It's because only short-range nuclear missiles are possible. That's why putting them with such close proximity in Cuba was considered a danger by President Kennedy. Things seemed to finally be coming together with the moon landing. We were there on the surface of another planet. You could see it on TV. Well, first it was projected onto a silver screen, and then the TV cameras were allowed to film off the silver screen, because obviously you wouldn't want the real footage. I mean, if you want to go back and look at the real footage of the initial moon landing, you can't, because it's been taped over by NASA, and no one was fired, no one was punished. Of course, they want to get rid of the evidence. Now, at this stage, a band of Apollo faithful will be howling in protest, "We did go to the moon." Then why did nothing come of it? Why have we not been back in 40 years? The Apollo faithful will say, "Oh, it's budget priorities, we've been there, we've done that, it's not economical to mine on the moon." That just doesn't hold water. That's a load of rubbish. We haven't been back to the moon because we never went there in the first place. In the year 1994, I read a book by Ralph Renee which suggested just such a thing, that the entire moon landing had been a hoax. This is the reason why we don't have a moon base now, why we aren't mining on the moon. Werner von Braun promised a moon base by the 1980s. We don't have that. We have nothing.